Welcome to a Legendarium special about Maximinus Thrax, Rome's bloody barbarian emperor. In this episode, we will talk about how a half-barbarian warrior became first a commander of the Roman legions and then the emperor of Rome itself. Gaius Julius Verus was born in 172 AD. in Thrace, a region near the Black Sea, to a peasant father and an Alani mother. Because of his birthplace, he became known as Thrax, and he would be remembered as Maximinus Thrax. As a young man, barely able to speak Latin, he presented himself before the future Emperor Septimius Severus. He requested permission to compete in games that Severus held to honor the birth of his second son, Geda. According to legend, Thrax was an exceptionally large man, supposedly standing 8 feet tall, though he almost certainly stood somewhere over 6 feet tall, which would have still made him much larger than the average Roman. According to further legend, the youth's thumb was so large that he wore his wife's bracelet upon it instead of a ring. He also probably suffered from acromegaly, for he had a prominent brow, nose, and jaw. Though probably not 8 feet tall, Maximinius's size and presence impressed Severus enough that the future emperor offered Thrax several opponents. After Thrax defeated 16 foes, including 7 men in wrestling contests, Severus offered Thrax a commission in his personal bodyguard. Severus also offered Thrax silver pieces and a golden collar as sweeteners to make sure this giant warrior joined his army. Because of his size and strength, Thrax quickly rose through the ranks, and many revered him as a latter-day Achilles, Ajax, or Hercules. Deeply loyal to Septimius Severus, he served both him and his older son Caracalla. Indeed, Caracalla's edict of 212 AD, which made all freemen Roman citizens, also made then 40-year-old Thrax a Roman citizen. After another prefect named Maximinus murdered Caracalla, Thrax left the Roman army rather than serve a usurper and regicide. For a time, he lived in his Thracian villa with his wife and his son, also named Gaius. However, the Severan dynasty soon returned to the throne in the infamous and outrageous Elagabalus, who so appalled Thrax that he chose to serve on the frontier rather than be around the obnoxious young emperor. After the murder of Elagabalus and the raising of Alexander Severus to the imperial purple in 222 AD, Thrax hurried to Rome to present himself. He received a warm welcome, and under Emperor Alexander, Thrax's career really took off. He commanded a legion in Egypt in 232 AD, governed the Roman province of Mesopotamia, which had been conquered and created by his mentor and benefactor Septimius Severus, and then led Roman forces on the Rhine River. In the early spring of 235 AD, Emperor Alexander Severus and his mother attempted to start a war against the Germans. They hoped to restore the cowardly young emperor's image with the army and people of Rome. Unfortunately, Emperor Alexander chose to offer the tribes bribes instead of spears and arrows. The army became furious and went on the market for a new emperor. Maximinus likely arranged for his supporters to proclaim him the new emperor, and he marched against Alexander's camp. Maximinus Thrax murdered Emperor Alexander and his mother, then returned their mangled, naked corpses to Rome. Afterwards, Maximinus Thrax officially declared himself emperor near the present-day city of Mainz on March 20th, 235 AD. The Senate reluctantly approved their new emperor, even though they considered him a barbarian and so far beneath them. Thrax's son, Gaius Julius Maximus, would be named Caesar and heir to the imperial purple. The historian Gordian wrote of the new emperor, "His character was naturally barbaric, as his race was barbarian. He had inherited the brutal disposition of his countrymen, and he intended to make his imperial position secure by acts of cruelty, fearing that he would become an object of contempt to the Senate and the people, who might be more conscious of his lowly origin than impressed by the honor he earned." Thrax soon showed that supposed barbarian cruelty when some highborn officers in his army talked up a senator named Magnus as a rival candidate to Thrax. When Maximinus Thrax learned of this conspiracy, he unleashed his supporters against them. One man, Titus Quartinus, was jumped in his sleep and strangled to death in his bed. Since Alexander Severus had many Christians in the imperial household, Maximinus targeted them for persecution. His men even arrested the then reigning Pope Pontian and sent him to the Sardinian tin mines, where he died only a year later. To show the snobs who ruled now, Thrax ordered the estates of powerful senators confiscated. His officers sought out informers to inform against men who had money and land to confiscate, whether or not the accusations of treason were true. After the confiscations, some powerful senators were left with only a wagon and their lives. These confiscations financed the wars that Thrax planned and paid for a pay raise that won him the army's loyalty, at least for now. Feeling more secure, the new emperor built a pontoon bridge and crossed the Rhine River. Thrax plunged deep into Germany, plundering and burning villages as he went. After a fierce battle near Württemberg, the emperor proclaimed himself Germanicus Maximus for restoring peace on the Rhine River, and best of all, on Roman terms. During the campaign season of 236 AD, he advanced towards the Danube River and won further bloody victories. He then bestowed upon himself the title of Decius Maximus, and to celebrate these twin victories, Emperor Maximinus Thrax held elaborate festivals and celebrations across the empire. However, Thrax's real problems lay not on the frontier but back in Rome, a city he never actually visited during his reign. Thrax's wars drained the imperial treasury, and his cuts to the city's grain supply harmed his reputation with the people, especially the poor. Furious at the barbarian emperor, the Senate went on the market for a new emperor. They threw their support behind the 80-year-old governor of Carthage called Gordian I. His son became known as Gordian II, heir to the imperial purple. The Senate and the new emperor declared Maximinus Thrax an enemy of the state. However, the governor of Numidia, an ally of Thrax, invaded Carthage and murdered the 46-year-old Gordian II after crushing his hastily raised militia. Upon learning of his son's death, Gordian I hung himself after a reign of 22 days. The Senate, still refusing to accept Maximinus Thrax and fearing he would take revenge upon them for supporting the Gordians, turned to a pair of co-emperors named Decius Calvinus Balbinus and Marcus Maximus. The people of Rome did not welcome their new emperors warmly. Whenever they appeared, the two received a hail of stones from angry mobs who chased them back to their palace. To appease the angry citizens, the Senate named the 13-year-old grandson of Gordian I, imaginatively named Gordian III, as Caesar and heir to the imperial purple. Back on the Rhine, the constant campaigning left Maximinus's troops exhausted and grumbling. Nonetheless, Maximinus Thrax marched south to Italy, intending to clean house. He reached the city of Amosa, but found it evacuated and without the supplies he needed to feed his army. Next, Thrax traveled to the walled city of Aquileia, where the governor had declared for Gordian III and shut the city gates to Maximinus Thrax. The emperor addressed the governor's concerns with spears. The siege that followed proved long and brutal. The townspeople of Aquileia defended their walls with sulfur and fire, which destroyed siege engines and burned and blinded many of Thrax's soldiers. As the siege dragged on, the army ran low on provisions, and soon guards had to be posted around the mules lest hungry soldiers slaughter them. Furious soldiers turned to eating rats and snakes. Maximinus decided that the siege proved unsuccessful because of cowardice, and he executed several of his commanders for their supposed lack of courage. Finally, Thrax's exhausted and embittered army united in their hatred of him. Mutinous soldiers murdered Thrax and his son while they slept in their tent, just as Thrax's men murdered his enemies 3 years before. The rebels mounted their heads on poles and displayed them to the defenders of Aquileia before sending them on to be presented to the Senate. Maximus, who had marched north to relieve Aquileia, entered the city as a hero, with citizens scattering flowers and laurel leaves before his path. Though one can debate whether Thrax was a good emperor, the death of Maximinus brought about what many historians consider a period of crisis and chaos. Maximus returned to Rome a hero, but soon quarreled with the jealous Balbinus. Tired of both men, the Praetorian Guard stormed the palace, seized the emperors, retired them at sword point from politics, and then dragged their bodies through the streets of Rome. Gordian III was proclaimed the new emperor, the last in the year of the 6 emperors. However, Rome's problems had only begun, for this upheaval helped to hurl the empire into a time known as the crisis of the 3rd century. That wraps things up for this episode of the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.